Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. First of all, we would like to say Jazakallah khair for our brothers from ICCC for coming today. We really appreciate your presence as always, and we just want to thank you again for also with the potluck, and also we want to thank the IC3 administration for setting up tonight's event. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a beautiful event and to incur his blessings upon it. Ameen. What Hafiz Mustafa just recited were the verses from Surah Safat. And in this surah, one of the greatest sacrifices, in my opinion, in the Quran is made. And this sacrifice is very unique in a sense because no other prophet was tested with this type of test. And this test, as many of you know, in the next 30 days, the month of Dhul Hijjah will be starting. And in the month of Dhul Hijjah, we honor the legacy of one particular family, and that is the family of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and how he settled in Makkah. Now, what's unique about this story is that at the end of these 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, we have Eid al-Adha, the celebration of the sacrifice. What is this sacrifice? And the reason I want to talk about this today is that in these next coming 30 days or so, we have to kind of prepare ourselves for the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or in which the Prophet ﷺ told us that these are the 10 best days of the year, whereas the last 10 nights of Ramadan are the best nights of the year. So in these days, it's recommended to fast and to do extra good deeds during the day. But one thing that we have to particularly realize is that it's called Eid al-Adha for a reason, right? It's a sacrifice. And the first thing we have to ask ourselves is that what sacrifices do we need to make in our lives? As this year or this Islamic calendar is coming to a close, we have to ask ourselves, what are our New Year's Islamic resolutions, right? And more so when it comes to identifying changes in our life, what's the most important thing about change is not adding more into your life. Rather, it's about letting go first. For example, right? If I told you that I didn't, let's say I was busy all day, right? And I wanted to increase my recitation of the Quran. Is it possible for me to increase my recitation if I'm already busy throughout the day? No, right? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. The numbers don't add up. So I would have to take something out of my life first, right? So I would need to stop watching TV as much. I would need to stop going on my phone as much. I need to stop procrastinating as much. And then I open up time for the Quran to be introduced into my life. But one of the most amazing sacrifices in the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and as Hafiz Mustafa was reciting, the verses in Surah Safat are very interesting because they go through the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam very, very quickly. From verses 90 onwards, it's as though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is skipping years in every single verse, right? First, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how Ibrahim alayhi salam contemplated about the sun and the moon, and then he questioned his community, and then the fire, right? And then etc. So things jump one to the next. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stops and he slows down. And this pace kind of slows down around verse 101 and 102. And for the sake of time, we'll just translate it. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so Ibrahim alayhi salam, he makes a dua. And for anybody who is looking to have kids or has kids, I would definitely recommend you to memorize this dua from Surah Al-Safat by Ibrahim alayhi salam, where he says, Rabbi habli minas salihin, right? My Lord, grant me a child from amongst the righteous. So that's verse 100 from Surah Al-Safat, which is the 37th surah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so we gave him good tidings of a son who is halim, right? Somebody who's forbearing, somebody who's very, very patient, but he's also very intellectual at the same time. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something very interesting. So now, again, the timeline, it kind of skips many years. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and when he reached with his son, or when his son reached of age, of working age. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that around this time, he's probably a teen or younger than that. And as we know, that Ibrahim alayhi salam, he gets a dream. And in this dream, he's basically told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you have to go sacrifice this son, right? And just to tell you about the difficulty of having a son, right? Many prophets were tested with not having children, right? And that is a great trial on any single parent. You cannot name me one parent who's not going through a lot of suffering, who is trying to have kids and they can't have it. For those parents, it's very difficult. It's such a great difficulty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings this to light in the Quran with the example of multiple prophets, right? We also know of Prophet, obviously, Ibrahim alayhi salam and Zakaria alayhi salam. And so, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he had a son when he was much older in age. And what's unique about Ibrahim alayhi salam is that even in the dua, in the salah, he has a constant love for having righteous offsprings. Even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't grant him his firstborn son Ismail alayhi salam until he was, some of the scholars say, in his 80s, right? And so he has his son, and you can imagine through all that difficulty, a husband and a wife, when they have a children, the love for that child is even greater, right? Because they go through a lot of difficulty to get to that point. So not only has Ibrahim alayhi salam always wanted a child, now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that now that you form this bond with him, now that he's of age, you have to sacrifice him. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, now these tests only come to prophets, okay? None of us should ever have a dream like that, okay? Now, his dream is very interesting, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we tested Ibrahim in ways nobody else has been tested. That's a fact. And what's interesting is that, so Ibrahim alayhi salam, he has his dream. And then so now Ibrahim alayhi salam, what does he have to do? He has to go to Ismail alayhi salam, and he has to tell his son about this dream. Now what's unique about prophets is that one of the signs of prophethood is that when you see a dream, it is a sign of, it is a form of revelation, right? In the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving them a commandment. So one of, like for example, in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, when Yusuf alayhi salam tells his father of the dream, the scholars say that he has already interpreted what the dream is. Even though he was about 7 years old at the time, because he was a prophet, he understood the dream, which is why he shared it with his father. And his father didn't ask him to interpret the dream, right? His father immediately responded to the dream and told him not to tell his brothers of the dream, right? Now, same thing happens here. He tells him, I had this dream. And so he says, oh my son, indeed I have seen a dream that I must sacrifice you. And then he says, what do you think? He asks his son, what do you think? This is probably, like I said, one of the most difficult moments in the Quran. A father who has suffered so much in his life, he has been kicked out of it, and all these verses before that talk about Ibrahim alayhi salam being kicked out of his house, thrown into a burning pit of fire, having to go through the trials with his wife Sarah alayhi salam, and then to go through the trials of Hajar alayhi salam, and then coming to Makkah and having to leave them there in this desert. You think about it, constant difficulties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting him through. And then now this, where he has to go and tell his son that, I have to sacrifice you. This type of test is unreal. And what's unreal about it is the fact that Ibrahim alayhi salam asks his son, what do you think I should do? That's how nervous he was. The immense pressure of the prophets is very, very interesting, especially in the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And then Ismail alayhi salam, he responds, and this is all in verse 102. He says, "O my father, do as you are commanded, and you will find me, inshallah, with those who are as-sabirin, or those who are the patient, right? Those who are steadfast." And what's interesting about this, and I really just want to talk about this, because after this, as we know, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he takes his son Ismail alayhi salam, and some of the scholars, even Ibn Khatir, they say that Ibrahim alayhi salam even ran the blade. He even cut it, but then the knife didn't cut, and as we know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replaced his son with a ram or a animal. But the unique thing about this is that there's two sacrifices actually in this story. The first sacrifice, as we know, is for Ibrahim alayhi salam, that test. But the second sacrifice that maybe is not talked about so much is the sacrifice of Ismail alayhi salam. And I'll tell you why. Have you ever met that one person in your life? Despite what difficulties you are going through, you know you can go to them and you can speak to them, and they're willing to listen to you. They're willing to sacrifice their own time, their own emotional investment just to hear you out. This type of sacrifice, in my opinion, is as great as a sacrifice as Ibrahim alayhi salam's. Because Ismail alayhi salam in this moment was tested as well. He was tested because he knew he was his father was a prophet, and he was a prophet as well. And one of the signs of prophethood is that you can interpret dreams. And so as soon as his father told him the dream, basically he understood it as this is a sign of also prophethood, that he immediately understood what it was. Now what's interesting, and as I mentioned this, is that how does Ibrahim alayhi salam have such a relationship with his son, Ismail? Now this is really interesting. Think about the level of the relationship he has with his son, where he can ask him, what do you think about this dream? Right? And how do you develop that type of connection? And why is this so important? Because this story shows us one thing. When we're younger, one of the things that happens is that our parents are they are our protectors, right? And little do parents realize that one day these children will be protecting me. These children will be taking care of me. And if you look at it in this moment, Ibrahim alayhi salam looked for who to support him? Ismail alayhi salam. Now, how did he do this? The reason he's able to do this, and I highly encourage everybody to buy this book, is called When Hearing Becomes Listening. And one of the things it talks about in great detail is that how does a parent develop that type of relationship where not only they are listening to their children, but their children are also hearing them back. How often do we see where we might say, you know, I wish my kid was like Ismail alayhi salam, right? Who is so obedient and he listens to his father. But the reason Ismail salam got to this point in his life is because of how Ibrahim alayhi salam and Hajar alayhi salam raised him. Now you might say Hajar alayhi salam is not in this story, right? But her story took place when what? Ismail alayhi salam was an infant. And it's actually, I discovered something probably pretty recently that's pretty interesting, is that the role of the mother, when is it mentioned commonly with the prophets in the Quran, right? If you look at the story of Luqman alayhi salam, he's speaking to his son, right, who's about a teenager. And in this conversation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he interjects while he's having this father-son conversation, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something so interesting, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when it came to the mother, her role was, you know, she carried him in weakness upon weakness. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the pregnancy, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, and she weans the child for 2 years, aka she spends an extreme amount of care and time with the child for the first few years of their life. Now what's interesting is that in the Quran, it's a similar sense. If you look at all the prophets who speak to their sons, they are in their later age. They are teenagers, right? Like in this story, Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam. Ismail salam is of age now. If you look at the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, he was grown up as well. But if you look at the story of Maryam alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam, where the mother is mentioned, the mother is mentioned when Isa alayhi salam is a baby, right? If you look at the story of Musa alayhi salam, is the father mentioned or the mother? The mother is mentioned, right? And when is the mother mentioned? When he's an infant, correct? And same thing as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the story of Luqman alayhi salam, or actually even if you look at the story of Ismail alayhi salam, there's a moment for Hajar alayhi salam's story. When is that? When Ismail alayhi salam is a baby, right? When Ibrahim alayhi salam drops Ismail and Hajar alayhi salam off in the desert. And then, as you know, she runs back and forth to 2 hills which are called Safa and Marwa, etc. But at that time, Ismail alayhi salam is a baby. Now what's unique, and the reason I bring this parallel up, is that there are 2 dynamics, there are 2 different relationships that are going on, but both of them are critical to the nourishment or to the nurturing of the child. How the mother and how the father both speak to the children is extremely important. And as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, is that when it comes to children, parents are the primary keys to goodness. The parents are the primary keys to goodness. And they can also be the primary keys to evil. And how is that? Because one of the things is that the child, when they're very young, they have this thing called the attachment theory. And in the attachment theory, it basically talks about a relationship that a parent forms with their child at a very young age. And so a great deal of research has been done with this. And basically, the research says is that a person's ability to connect to people is primarily based on how emotionally present their parents were when they were infants or when they were younger. And if you take this example and you look at the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, the scholars, they say that when Yusuf alayhi salam is being tempted by the minister's wife, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is that she desired him and he would have desired her if he did not see the sign from his Lord, right? And the scholars, they say the sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought him was that he saw an image of his father, Yaqub alayhi salam. And because of that personal relationship he had with him many years ago, right, before he was sold into slavery, and his father came to him at that moment, and like visually, Yusuf alayhi salam remembered what his father had taught him. And because of what he learned so many years ago, Yusuf alayhi salam stayed away from the temptation. Now, is that music in the back? Is that somebody's phone? Okay. It's a different type of event today. No, I'm kidding, guys. Okay, so basically, one of the important things about this is that when we look at this sacrifice of Ismail alayhi salam, right? One of the things is that if a parent fails, like Ibrahim alayhi salam did an excellent job of listening to his kids. When you listen to your kids, what you allow them to do is that you allow them to have trust in people. When you are able to listen to them, you're able to understand their feelings. You don't just brush their emotions off quickly, and you're able to understand them, then they develop trust in you. And the reason this is so important is because how can a child whose parents have neglected them at a young age ever develop trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Think about it. If parents are the keys to goodness, as the Prophet ﷺ said, then how can that child, if you ignore them, if you don't care about them, you don't listen to them, regardless of what their age is, right? All these prophets, these stories, the kids are all young. All their sons are young. But if you're able to listen to them, then what they're able to do is that they are able to develop trust. And when we think of teaching our children, the concept of trusting in Allah is very important, because the best way to help develop trust in Allah in our kids is that we have to cultivate this idea that yes, although we are their primary guardians, right, and we will listen to them and we will take care of them. Also, they are able to have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because as you develop trust in yourself or through your parents, then what you're able to do is that you're able to open the doors of knowledge, right? When other people give you information, you're able to absorb it quickly. And so really, the main lesson I want to speak about is ultimately when we are posed with two types of situations, right? Something that we know is a commandment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What sacrifices do we have to make in order to follow the commandments of Allah? On the opposite side, right? Many times we're faced with challenges right in front of our faces. We will see other people going through many, many difficulties, right? And how will we react to them? And the reason I mention this is that, look, Ismail alayhi salam, he could have told his father, no way, I'm not, listening to you. He could have revolted against him, right? And you could have imagined what that would have done to Ibrahim alayhi salam. And the reason I bring this up is that for a lot of the youngsters that are sitting here, tell him to stop talking. For a lot of the youngsters that are sitting here today, how often is it, right, that your parents advise you to do something and you disobey them? You don't listen to them, etc. You have your own desires. And the reason for that is because we haven't learned what it means to sacrifice our own ego to listen to other people. This is really important. For all the youngsters that are growing up, you will be faced with many different noises. throughout your daily life. You'll have stresses of school, work, job, whatever it may be, your parents, all these responsibilities. And you might say to yourself, and even as a parent, you might say, I have all these things going on in my life. How do I even make time for the people who are around me? Right? And if we can't even make time for the people who are around us, how are we going to make time for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So the most important thing when it comes to this sacrifice is that understand what you need to sacrifice that is grabbing your attention the most. What do we need to do? Like, is it our phone? Is it our TVs? Is it our computers that's sucking so much time away from us that we fail to see what's going on in front of other people, right? And maybe if we had that time, then we can help those around us. We could see the difficulties that other people are going through and assist them through it. But you can only do this until we're able to sacrifice what's beloved to us to make room for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and those who are close to us. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who are able to hear and listen to others. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who are able to sacrifice our egos and put our families and our religion as priority. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who constantly seek His guidance and to bless us in this rightful gathering. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. And we will be doing the Maghrib Adhan right now, and then within like 5-6 minutes we'll have Maghrib Salah. Jazakallahu khair.